Dynamics Basics 2. So we're going to continue talking about a compressor here and how it functions. We've talked about all of the controls and what they do. And now let's talk about kind of the effect of a compressor and what sound that creates. So if we play our guitar again and we go a little crazy here, we can hear some of the compression effects. Now, the one control that we didn't talk about really is the gain, which is also called makeup gain, and that is really the whole point of a compressor. We're turning down the peaks, everything that goes over the threshold, so that we can turn up the whole signal and make it appear louder, even though the peak isn't any higher than before. So if we turn that up, increase our gain, now everything gets louder. We hit the bypass button. You can hear how that's louder. But you can also hear, if you listen, I'll stop talking for a second so you can listen to this. Every time he hits a note really hard, you can hear it kind of gets clamped down, kind of sucks the life out of it a little bit. Listen to this. And hear how the background noise kind of rises up after he hits. Okay, and if we adjust these, okay, so now the big thing about compression is training your ear to hear that. It's part of training developing that professional ear like we've talked about before. And one of the things that's difficult is really hearing those effects of compression. Now, what happens with most people as they learn to mix is they go through an overcompression stage. And that's because they compress to the point where they can hear the effects. And once your ear gets attuned to the effects of compression, then you can hear more subtle effects of it, and then you don't have to compress things as hard to hear that you're doing something. And the key to basically everything in mixing is adding in subtlety. So as far as compression goes, we're not going to leave this amount of compression on our electric guitar in our mix. It's really not going to make it sound that good. And if we compressed every single track to this extent, our whole mix is really going to sound really compressed and like everything is getting the life sucked out of them. So we're going to go a more subtle route. So we're going to raise our threshold back up. And adjust our attack and release to get a nice amount of compression. It's maybe controlling a little bit, helping us to raise the level of the guitar a little bit. Okay, so there's a couple of factors here in your goal in adding compression to a track. Number one goal is to even out the dynamics. That's why it's called dynamics. Dynamics is loud and soft. So if your track gets loud and really easy to hear and then gets soft and not as easy to hear sometimes, then you might want to add some dynamics to it so it evens it out, so it turns down those loud parts and brings up those soft parts. One of the other purposes for compression and dynamics processing is to make things appear as if they are sounding louder, just like we were showing. So what happens is when you lower those peaks and turn everything up, you increase the average signal. And so even though your peak isn't any higher before, because no matter what you do, you can't really get your peak any higher than 0 and avoid distortion, as we've talked about before. What happens is you get greater average. So the distance between your high peak and your low is smaller. Then the way we hear with our ears, that sounds louder, even though the peak isn't any louder, because we hear in averages. And so that's going to make the track sound louder, and that's where you hear compression all the time. Okay, and there's certain styles of music where compression is very prominent, and that's especially pop music and rock and roll music. Basically, most of the popular forms of music, when it comes to folk music and traditional music and such, compression is not used as much because we have a more acoustic sound that we're trying to recreate. And so compression doesn't give us as much of that acoustic natural sound. But you can't really mix popular music without using compression because it's the sound of that kind of music. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of some of the purposes of compression and get you to start being able to hear that compression as you're working on it and develop your ear for compression. But we're going to progress from here and start compressing individual tracks, and then we'll move along to gating tracks and adding other things like that, and we can see all the forms of dynamics as we use them in our projects here.